They say when the federal agent broke open the last sealed ledger, he stopped breathing for a full 12 seconds, not because of what he read, but because he realized the handwriting changed halfway through the page. The first lines were written by Elijah Thornhill, the last by someone who was supposed to be dead. March 14th, 1852. 7 women vanished from a plantation outside Montgomery, Alabama. Officially, they were purchased. Legally, they were owned. But beneath the legal ink was a ritual of control, one that wasn't about slavery, not entirely. It was about inheritance, transference, blood as currency. Elijah Thornhill had lived alone for 15 years before the purchase. He'd lost his wife and daughters in a fire, but the truth buried in the ashes was this: the fire hadn't destroyed his family, it had altered them. The journals found in his study were filled with diagrams of bones, symbols burned into page corners, and a repeated phrase: "Only through the 7th shall the veil lift." When investigators opened the cellar beneath his estate, they found no bodies, only 7 chairs, each facing a mirror, each carved with a different woman's name, and one still warm to the touch. The road to Thornhill Estate was barely a road at all, a tunnel of oaks that swallowed light, where even the air seemed to hesitate. Inspector Thomas Calloway's horse resisted halfway up the path. Animals always know first. He dismounted, walked the rest on foot, boots sinking into soil that looked freshly turned, as if the earth itself had been disturbed too often. When he reached the gate, 2 rusted iron bars chained but unlocked, he saw something carved into the left post. Not initials, coordinates, latitude and longitude. When traced, they pointed not to Alabama, but to a coastal point in West Africa, the same origin port listed in Thornhill's ledger from 1837, the Wise, ere his family burned. As Calloway entered, he felt the sudden stillness of a place that remembers. The silence wasn't empty, it was watching. The windows were shuttered, yet he could feel eyes behind every slat of wood. A faint sound echoed from inside the house, not quite a voice, not quite wind, repeating the same rhythm over and over, like a breath trained to obey. And then he saw it, above the doorway, carved in Latin, per servitutem, libertas. Through servitude, freedom. The door opened before Calloway could knock. No creak, no warning, just a slow, deliberate motion, as if the house itself had been expecting him. Elijah Thornhill stood there, tall but ghostly thin, his coat hanging loose from shoulders that hadn't felt sleep in years. His eyes were hollow, yet sharp, the kind of gaze that doesn't just see you, but measures your soul for weight. "Inspector Calloway," he said quietly, "I was wondering when you would arrive." Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Dust covered everything except one thing: 7 chairs arranged in a circle in the parlor, each facing inward, each with a name carved deep into the wood. 6 names were burned black. The 7th, Hannah, was newly carved, the shavings still curled beneath it. On the mantel rested 7 portraits, but all the faces were missing, cut out neatly, leaving only silhouettes. When Calloway asked about the women, Elijah smiled faintly. "They're here," he said, "each in their proper place." A clock ticked behind him, irregular and uneven, as if marking a heartbeat instead of time. And for a moment, Calloway swore the mirrors in the room were breathing. That night, after leaving the estate, Calloway stayed in his small room at the Exchange Hotel, but he didn't sleep. He spread Thornhill's confiscated journal across the desk, the candlelight shaking as if it too was afraid. The handwriting shifted from neat cursive to frantic slashes halfway through, and between the ink, faint, almost invisible, were fingerprints burned into the page itself. Every entry began with a name, not of the women, of families: Caldwell, Harper, Sutton, Bradford, Reynolds. The same names linked to the fire that destroyed Thornhill's home 17 years earlier. Every few pages, one line appeared again and again. Justice in symmetry. Blood must answer blood. But the deeper Calloway read, the more the entries turned wrong. Not hateful, calculated. Elijah described mapping the soul through lineage, identifying bloodlines by frequency, by sound. There were sketches of spirals, diagrams of skulls marked with ancient runes that matched symbols Calloway had seen once, in an 1839 Philadelphia archive on West African cosmology. The last entry was different, calm, almost tender. Hannah hears them now. The others have crossed. Below it, 7 fingerprints pressed in ash, 6 faint, 1 wet. When Calloway returned to Thornhill Estate 3 days later, the gate was open, as if the house had been waiting. The smell of damp wood and old smoke clung to the air. Elijah was nowhere to be found, but the front door again had been left unlocked. Inside, the silence was not empty this time. It pulsed, a low vibration beneath the floorboards, steady, rhythmic, deliberate, like breath forced through the earth. He traced the sound to the center of the parlor, where the 7 chairs once stood. Now, only 6 remained. The 7th, Hannah's, was gone. The circle was incomplete. Beneath the rug, Calloway found the outline of a trapdoor sealed with wax. He pressed his ear against it and froze. There were voices below, faint, distant, layered, a chorus speaking in unison. He couldn't make out words, only patterns, like scripture recited in reverse. Then, a woman's scream, brief, cut off mid-breath. Calloway stumbled back. The wax seal broke under his boot, releasing a smell so thick and metallic it coated his throat. From the dark opening below, air rose, hot, humid, alive. And just before he fled, he heard a whisper crawl up the stairs. "We are not gone. We are becoming." Calloway returned to Montgomery at dawn, trembling but methodical. He filed a request to have the Thornhill estate searched under federal authority, citing violations of property and human rights law. The local marshal refused. "You don't understand," Calloway told him. "Something down there is alive that shouldn't be." But the man only smirked. "You've been listening to ghosts, Inspector." So Calloway forged the seal himself. A single wax emblem, U.S. Federal Property Search Order. It was enough to gain entry. By nightfall, he was back at the estate with 2 hired men. They descended into the cellar through the broken trapdoor, lanterns trembling as the heat thickened. The room below wasn't built. It was grown. Walls curved like rib cages, veins of black resin running through them. At the far end, a table made of stone, carved with 7 grooves, each the length of a human body. Above it, iron hooks swayed gently, though there was no wind. And on the wall, dozens of papers pinned in careful order, diagrams, bloodlines, calculations. At the center, a map of Montgomery's plantations, connected by lines that converged on one point. Thornhill's estate wasn't isolated. It was the origin. And the page smelled faintly of iron. The map stretched across the entire stone wall, its parchment stained by age and something darker. Montgomery's plantations formed a lattice, precise, deliberate. At first, Calloway thought it was simply land demarcation. Then he saw it. Every estate marked by a name, every name marked by a symbol. A circle with 7 points, repeating like a code. Lines connected the families Thornhill had tracked. Caldwell, Harper, Sutton, Bradford, Reynolds. But the lines weren't random. They intersected through bloodlines, through birth records, marriages, and ownership transfers that spanned generations. The pattern formed what looked like a sigil, geometric, ancient, something not meant for maps at all. In the center of that sigil was Thornhill's property, a single word written over it in red ink, Apex. Below the map, in Thornhill's handwriting, a chilling note. The balance must be restored, not by chains, but by pattern. The 7th completes the circuit. Through her, they return. Calloway felt a presence behind him. The subtle shift of air, the creak of something that wasn't wood. He turned sharply. Hannah stood at the bottom of the stairs, a lantern in her hand, her face calm, her eyes completely black. "Inspector," she whispered, "he's waiting for you upstairs." Hannah's eyes reflected the lantern flame like two pieces of obsidian. She did not blink, did not breathe. When she spoke again, her voice carried two tones, one her own, one deeper, slower, ancient. "You shouldn't have opened the seal," she said. "It was never meant for the living." Calloway raised his revolver, but the air thickened, pressing against his chest. The walls seemed to pulse. From the floor above came a sound, the slow drag of boots against wood. Footsteps. Elijah Thornhill descended the staircase, though his face looked wrong. The color of parchment, the texture of cracked stone. But his movements were steady, purposeful, alive. "Inspector," he said, calm as winter, "you've seen the design. Do you understand now? They weren't slaves, they were anchors." Behind him, something shifted in the dark, shapes moving along the ceiling like shadows that had forgotten gravity. "The bloodlines must close their circle," Elijah continued. "One drop from each root, and the veil opens." Hannah stepped closer to Calloway, her skin glistening with sweat or oil. "He gave us freedom," she whispered. "We just had to give him form." And then Elijah smiled, the first real smile since his family burned. The cellar trembled, as if the earth itself remembered pain. Elijah raised his hand, and the 7 grooves on the stone table began to fill, not with liquid, but with light, red and molten, like veins awakening. The walls expanded and contracted in rhythm, breathing. The air grew hotter, denser, until Calloway's lungs felt as though they were being filled with smoke. "Elijah," he shouted, "whatever this is, it's not justice, it's madness." The man's eyes flickered with something between fury and divine purpose. "Justice? No, Inspector. Correction. They built this land on screams. I'm just giving it a tongue." Hannah began to hum, that same low, rhythmic tone Calloway had heard beneath the floorboards. The sound crawled into the marrow. From the walls, silhouettes emerged, 6 of them, featureless, fluid, each matching a name from the journal. "Elijah Thornhill," Calloway said, stepping forward, revolver shaking. "Your family died because of men like you. Don't damn them again." Elijah only tilted his head. "They're not damned. They're finally heard." Then he slit his palm with a knife made of bone and pressed it into the center groove. The light pulsed once, and the house exhaled. The light inside the groove spread outward, crawling across the floor like veins of molten mercury. The air shuddered, thick with vibration, like the world beneath the house was groaning awake. Calloway staggered back, his revolver useless against what he was seeing. The walls, once stone, began to move, not crumble, move. Faces pressed out from the surface, human and yet not. Mouths formed where cracks split, whispering fragments of prayer and rage. Eyes opened, hundreds of them, blinking in sync with the heartbeat of the house. Each whisper layered into a chorus that grew until it became a single rising wail. "Elijah!" Calloway screamed. "Stop this before you tear the world apart!" But Elijah was kneeling now, both hands in the glowing grooves, his body convulsing as the light poured through him. Hannah's hum deepened into a scream that wasn't hers anymore. It was every voice beneath the estate, every soul buried and bound. The walls answered back. They didn't whisper now. They spoke. "We remember the chains. We remember the fire. We remember you." The floor buckled. The map burned. And Elijah Thornhill looked up through the flame and whispered, almost lovingly, "Then speak through me." The sound that followed was not thunder. It was heartbeat. Slow, relentless, ancient. The floor swelled beneath Calloway's feet, as if the ground itself was breathing. Every board twisted into sinew, every wall into muscle. What had been architecture was becoming anatomy. The chandelier crashed down, melting into strands that pulsed with blood. The portraits of the Thornhills slid off their frames, faces warping into open mouths that screamed in silence. The house, no longer wood or stone, had turned alive. Elijah stood in its center, arms outstretched, veins glowing like red lightning. His voice echoed through every wall. "They built this place with stolen lives, he cried. "Now it breathes with their truth." Calloway stumbled toward him, the lantern flickering in his shaking hand. "You're killing what's left of them, Elijah. You're not freeing anyone. You're feeding them." Hannah's body was trembling now, her eyes darting as if she were seeing two worlds at once. "He promised we'd be whole," she whispered. "He promised." The ceiling tore open, revealing not sky, but endless red light. Something vast was moving within it, pressing down, searching for a doorway. And Calloway realized. Elijah wasn't summoning the dead. He was building a god. The light pouring through the torn ceiling wasn't sunlight. It was alive. It pulsed in waves, every beat carrying the echo of screams, long buried beneath southern soil. Through that crimson veil, Calloway saw movement, colossal and shifting, as if something with no shape and too many eyes was pressing against the skin of reality, trying to be born. "Elijah!" he shouted over the roar. "You're opening a grave, not a heaven." But Elijah only smiled, his face half burned by light. A grave is a heaven, when the right souls are called. The red glow thickened into form, limbs of smoke and bone pushing through the walls, hands with fingers too long, too many joints. They reached for Elijah, caressing him like a child finally found. The floor quaked, the foundation cracking like ribs. Hannah dropped to her knees, sobbing. "He said it would free us." "It will," Elijah whispered, his voice breaking. "We'll never die again." Then from the pit below the stone table, something breathed. The air folded inward, bending light, bending sound, and from within that impossible darkness came a single, resonant word. Not English, not human, but old as the continent itself. A word that meant, awaken. The earth split like a wound reopening. From beneath the estate, black smoke poured upward, but it wasn't smoke. It was memory, shaped and screaming. Faces formed in it, flickering like candlelight. Slaves, masters, soldiers, preachers, all caught in a swirl of red ash and bone. The Thornhill estate itself began to rise, tearing free from its foundations, the air filled with the groan of wood that remembered pain. At the center of it all, Elijah Thornhill stood crucified in his own creation, arms stretched wide as the entity took him. His body was a conduit now, glowing from within, veins white-hot. He screamed, but his scream was joy. Calloway crawled across the shaking floor, clutching the last unburned lantern. He saw Hannah's body collapse beside him, the hum leaving her throat at last. Her final words were a whisper. "We were never meant to wake it." Then the light inside Elijah's body burst. The house fell silent. The red glow dimmed, then deepened into a pulse that matched the beat beneath the ground. The god hadn't vanished. It had merged. And in that instant, Calloway understood. The Thornhill estate wasn't destroyed. It had become the heart of something living. The silence after the awakening was worse than the screams. Dust floated through the air like falling ash, and the red light faded into a sickly gold. Every heartbeat in Calloway's chest echoed through the hollow body of the estate. The house was still alive, but now it was listening. He stumbled toward the shattered doorway, the lantern trembling in his grip. Behind him the walls still moved in slow, breathing waves, pulsing in rhythm with the earth below. He could hear Elijah's voice, not spoken, but inside his skull. Calm. Whispering. "You can't stop what's been written, Inspector. The circle has closed." Calloway ran. Through the warped hallway, past the portraits now weeping black, tears, out into the night that burned faintly red at the horizon. He didn't stop until the estate was a distant shadow behind him, pulsing faintly like a heart beating beneath the soil. When he reached Montgomery at dawn, he collapsed outside the courthouse steps, covered in soot and blood. They asked what happened. He tried to speak, but when he opened his mouth, a thin line of red smoke slipped out instead of words, and far behind him in the morning fog, the Thornhill estate breathed. By the time federal marshals reached the Thornhill estate, the land was gone. Where the mansion once stood was a crater, perfectly round, still warm, and humming faintly. Every journal, every record, every witness statement from Calloway's report vanished from the archives within a week. The official statement read, "Structural collapse due to subsurface gas ignition." But Calloway knew what he saw. He spent weeks in a government hospital, hands shaking, eyes fixed on corners no one else could see. They said it was trauma. He said it was unfinished. One night, a man in a dark coat visited him. No name, no badge, just a symbol on his lapel, a 7-pointed star. "The Thornhill matter," the man said, "is not to be spoken of again. The estate has been relocated." "Relocated where?" Calloway whispered. The man smiled faintly. "Not where, Inspector. When?" He left behind a single folder. Inside, 7 photographs of different sites across America: Louisiana, Virginia, Illinois, California, all marked with the same circular pattern Calloway had seen on the map. Beneath each, one line of text. The pattern grows, and stamped in red ink at the bottom: Project Apex. Phase 2, approved. In February of 1854, Inspector Jonathan Calloway disappeared from his boarding room in Montgomery. The door was locked from the inside. The only thing left on his desk was a wax-sealed envelope addressed to "Whoever finds this." Inside, a single page written in a shaking hand. "They think Thornhill ended that night. It didn't. The pattern follows blood. It hides in names, in cities, in deeds. Every 7 generations, it wakes. I hear it in the hum of train tracks, in the static of telegraph lines, in the pulse beneath my skin. The God beneath the earth isn't gone. It just learned how to wear our faces." Pinned to the letter was a small photograph, blurred, overexposed, of what looked like a human heart carved from wood, but it was moving, pulsing. 2 days later, Calloway's landlady reported hearing footsteps in his empty room at midnight. When authorities broke in, the walls were covered in circles drawn in blood, 7 of them, connected by straight lines converging at the bed frame. Under the mattress, burned into the wood, they found a single word: Apex. And every witness swore afterward, even after the room was scrubbed clean, they could still hear the faint sound of breathing,